Hello you guys and welcome to my channel. It's Shawnee here. Today I want to talk to you about my and Timothy's recent visit to Montgomery, Alabama. As you can see, I'm wearing an Alabama State University t-shirt. I love to support my HBCUs. I'm a two-time HBCU graduate. So whenever I'm in Nashville, I'll pop in to Fisk, or I'll go to Meharry, or I go to Tennessee State and try to buy a sweatshirt or a t-shirt or just walk around the beautiful campuses at any HBCU. Frankly, I just love to visit HBCU. So a few weeks ago, Timothy and I were like, we don't really have anything to do this weekend. Let's shoot over to the Birmingham Zoo. Many years ago, we visited the Birmingham Zoo on a couple of occasions. We really like the Birmingham Zoo. It's nice. You can ride a little train. And so we were like, we'll just have a fun weekend in Alabama. Well, I don't know what has happened to the Birmingham Zoo. The Birmingham Zoo is not the same zoo we had visited several years ago. So we were like, I don't know what's going on with these tigers and these animals, but this is not okay. So I said, Tim, you know what? Let's go to Montgomery and Birmingham are 1 hour apart. And so I said, we can visit the Legacy Museum, which is Bryan Stevenson's museum that focuses on the transatlantic slave trade and parallels that to modern day mass incarceration. So I had never been to the Legacy Museum. I've heard about it and I wanted to go. Plus, in all my years of living in Alabama, I lived in Tuscaloosa for almost almost 7 years. I never went to Montgomery, Alabama. I just never went. I never went to Selma. So these are places I just want to pop into because of their historical significance. Visiting the Legacy Museum was life-changing for me and for Tim. And it was just really life-changing, and I encourage you all to go. So I want to tell y'all about my experience. So we pull up to the Legacy Museum, plenty of parking, everything, just like right there, I guess in downtown Montgomery. And so when you walk to the plaza, you can see statues. And so you can see Martin Luther King, you see Rosa Parks, and across the way you can see a statue of John Lewis. They kind of set the tone early on by having signs that say, hey, this is a memorial plaza, no dogs, no skateboarding. It's just for you to reflect. And so that kind of sets the tone for what you are about to see. They kind of want you to know you are about to be in an immersive experience that is going to be life-changing. So I was like, okay, you could feel it. It was kind of like palpable, right? So I'm looking at the sky and the clouds are pretty dark. So we were standing out just taking pictures, and then we went around to the statues because I was like, once we leave out of here, we're probably not going to come back around. I want to make sure we got Rosa and Dr. King and, Senator Congressman Lewis. And we got them and took photos there. We walked into the Legacy Museum and, it was no line at all. There were people in there, but it was just like no line. And so we bought our tickets, and these are the tickets. And so the tickets are $5 each, $5 per person, and they give you entrance to all of the exhibits, which include the Freedom Monument Sculpture Park, which was awesome. Legacy Museum itself, which is the main attraction, from enslavement to mass incarceration, that's its title. Also to the National Museum for Peace and Justice. And also with these tickets, if you choose to do the Alabama River boat ride, which sort of traces the boat rides that were used to transport the enslaved across the Alabama River in the city of Montgomery, these tickets are for all of the events. So that was good, and they're only $5. So this was like a Hollywood experience, you all. I'm telling you. And I was like, I had to look this up and say, who did this? Who created all of this? All of this is in Montgomery, Alabama. What in the world? Where have I been? And so from my understanding, this museum has been open since 2018. And so I was like, I probably transitioning jobs, but I should have been down here. So we get to the counter, we purchase our tickets, and then you're sort of like, almost like you're going through, security. They, ask you, do you have anything? You check your bag a little bit, and they say no camera. So if you go, you cannot film, and it is for a very specific reason. Curators of this museum, Mr. Stevenson, and all those who work so hard to create it, and it is like a Hollywood experience. So you go in, And I could hear the water, y'all. I could hear the water. And I was like, water? Where's water coming from? Where's water coming from? And on the screens, you see the water going on the screen. You're like, this is what they felt like. The individuals who put so much intention and thought into this museum, they recreated portions of slavery so that you could really grasp and feel what it felt like, what our ancestors felt like on that boat, on those boats. That was very much jarring for me, just to see it on the screens. And you know, we all have been to movies. You've seen big screens, you've seen flat screens that are huge at, you know, stadiums and games. So this was the big screen, and all you heard is the water splashing. And while you hear this water splashing, you all, this blue water, you can read. And you're just reading, immersed instantly with the history of the transatlantic slave trade all on the wall. And you're like just in this room by yourself. Well, you're with other people, but it's such a large room, and you're just surrounded by this water. You're surrounded by this water as you're reading about your ancestors, our ancestors, those who were enslaved, reading about their voyage, reading about how it started. System of slavery, right? It was a chattel system, meaning it was supposed to be passed down for generations and generations. So this girl here was not supposed to be free. So then you move on to the next portion. Then you can just see more writings on the wall. It's just more, basically more of the exhibit. And a lot of it was just words and things for you to read and just basic history so that you can kind of understand really what you were looking at, really what took place during the transatlantic slave trade, how it all got started. So that was, you know, important, just standing there reading, and everyone was reading, and then you could still hear the water, and then there's music playing, and you see sculptures in the room of like your ancestors, and you see their faces in distress, y'all. Then once you kind of stay there in this room, and it tells you like the new world was created and how slavery was basically a big part of the creation of colonies and the creation of states that we know today, how everything was basically built in this country by enslaved Africans, by those who were brought from there, from the continent of Africa over to the new world. Essentially, all of enslaved Africans essentially built the Carolinas, built Virginia, built Mississippi, built Alabama. And so you learn this, and you're like looking for your state, like what took place in Montgomery, what took place here. Then you kind of move on. And this is all self-directed, right? And so you move on into this room, and it's very dark, you all. But your attention is directed to the floor, y'all. When I tell you, I do nothing but cry. And I'm telling you, this experience is so immersive. It's just like you are there. And all I saw were heads, like actual heads, cut off to this portion, and they looked like they were white. You could see as you walk down on both sides were children and men and women looking like they were in agony, looking like they were crying out, help me. Mouth open in pain, y'all. And when I started to look at this and to see, I was just like, Lord, help me. And then you still hear the water. And then on the walls, flat screens just telling you what was taking place. The whole experience is telling you what our ancestors, the enslaved, had to go through to get to the new world, or to whatever continent or country they were being shipped to. Because remember, in the transatlantic slave trade, it was an international thing. Slavery was international. It wasn't just domestic slavery in the United States. Slavery was an international trade. It ended internationally in 1808, but in the United States, it continued through 1865. Moved through that particular, and you start to see the jail scene. This is the connection from slavery to mass incarceration. You can see the bars start to form, and you can see that those individuals who were enslaved were basically jailed, and waiting to be auctioned off. And so they had a whole prison in there, or jail cells. And when you walked up to one of them, a hologram appeared. Holograms were someone singing a Negro spiritual. So then you learn about how during slavery, the enslaved were communicating through songs. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, or whatever the song. It may have been something like that playing. And some of them may have been songs from a different, prior to the civil rights generation, but you get what I'm saying. Those songs were playing, and you can see that there was a call and response going on even during slavery. And like, there was not just this acquiescence of slavery, but that people were actually resisting through song. But what can you do when your body is physically enslaved? And so as I walked through, you could go see that children were enslaved. And I started to think about my nieces and my nephew. And so this chattel system, this kept coming to my mind. Honestly, if slavery had not been abolished, every single person in your family, if you are a person of African descent, would still be enslaved today. And it was very emotional to move through this jail cell to see that there were men in there and that there were women in there, and their holograms appeared and they were talking and engaging, and some of them were singing. And so we just sort of moved through the exhibit, and there were just different parts of this exhibit. Now, this whole experience, the museum, is going to take you about 3 to 4 hours. It really could be a 2-day experience. And so we just moved through, and just the history of Montgomery, Alabama, history of the domestic slave trade was highlighted in such a profound way, because international slavery was abolished. The New World said, oh no, we're still going to continue this because it benefits us to have slavery. And so then you start to see how many of those who were enslaved in the North, and slavery was all about profit. It was not about anything. It was about a lot more, right? Profit, degradation, dehumanization of individuals who were considered to be less than, right? It was about so much more. I could go on. But anyway, it was about profit for individuals who were free and who were basically white during this time. It was about, legacy planning for them, succession planning off the backs of individuals who were enslaved and who were captured and brought to the New World, the Americas. So basically brought here to create every single thing that you see around you in your city. It was created by someone who was enslaved from the continent of Africa. And so you see the history of Montgomery, Alabama. You say, well, why is Montgomery significant? Well, most of the slave trade, domestic slave trade, pretty much all of it occurred in Montgomery, Alabama. It was the site, the hub of the domestic slave trade. And what I learned is that, yes, while slavery was still taking place in sort of like the northern states, it became less, became sort of like a taboo. But also it wasn't profitable for those. It had begun to become not profitable for those who were living in the North, right? Because the South is a high agricultural area. And so the type of slavery that was taking place up north, although it was very harsh, equally as harsh, like who wants to be enslaved? So no slavery was fun for anyone, but it was more like confinement to housework or being a butler and things of that nature, although they were still treated horribly, obviously, because they were enslaved against their will. But after a while, it became to be sort of like this taboo and not so accepted up north, which we've all heard. And so then you saw this big migration, the enslaved from the northern region, right, to the south. And so that's why when you say, well, why is there so many black people in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana? Because of this migration of moving. And then everybody pretty much came through Montgomery, Alabama, and they were dispersed all over the south, all over these United States of America. And that was called the domestic slave trade. That's just my Cliff Note version of it. And it's, of course, if you are a historian, there's a lot much more to it. And you can read books and go visit for yourself. But I was just astonished to learn all of this. And then it took me to my own family. Because growing up, we always recited our family history at family reunions. I've been at reunions ever since I was a little girl. We always had family reunions. And there was always a portion when we would recite our family history. And on my maternal grandfather's side, the Osborns, that family legacy and history is tied to Montgomery, Alabama. So I was like, it makes sense. If you are a black person in these United States, particularly if you are in the South, your family members have some ties to Montgomery, Alabama. They were probably, fortunately, spread out or dispersed through the use of steamboats. So Timothy and I continue to go through this exhibit, and then we continue to go, and just to make a long story short, it goes on to show you just the history of lynching, the history of mass incarceration, the history of convict leasing system, and how all of this is tied to policies that impact Black Americans today, how all of it is tied to our educational system, it's tied to our healthcare system, it's tied to state policy, local policy, federal policy, because essentially we again were considered to be chattel, not considered to ever be people who were free. And so this museum is so well done. I just cannot express it enough. And so then you move on from mass incarceration, and of course you start to talk about the civil rights movement and all those things that happened. And then you just start to see what took place in your state, my state, colored signs, all white signs, all of these things you start to see, and you learn about the unfortunate history of how this new world, these United States, were created off the backs of the enslaved, right? Our ancestors. There's this, you walk over into this room and it is all gold. It's a celebratory room. I can't think of the name of the room, but it is so beautiful, you all. And it just goes high, almost like you're looking up to heaven. And the whole room is just like gold. It's just like gold, the color of gold, like this. And in that room, every single wall is covered by a notable African American, a person who has contributed something notable to this country, to the development of this world. And so it just goes on and on, because the walls were so tall and the room was so massive. And it was just like, despite all of this stuff that happened to our ancestors, yet we still rise. And I was just so uplifted to see that. And so that was sort of like the end of the museum part, and you could read on the wall, and if there was a touch screen, it was interactive. Like I said, this whole experience was immersive. Even the mass incarceration part, you could walk up to, you can tell I'm a millennial, right? I'm doing this with the phone. But if you use the phone, and they were actual phones like this, you could talk to a person who was in prison, but you could see the connection from the enslavement of our ancestors to modern day enslavement through the prison system, the prison industrial complex. Back to this beautiful gold room. So if you touch the interactive screens, like the big, I'm just gonna call them big iPads, right? If you point it to someone, Frederick Douglass will pop up. You might see Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, or you might see Phyllis Wheatley. You may see any notable person who's contributed Black culture, Black history. And it was very specific, because they were very specific and intentional to be talking about Black Americans, okay? Black American contributions to society. And yes, there was an acknowledgement in this museum of abolitionists and those who helped to free slaves, but this was strictly, this is what Black people have gone through. This is what African people went through to build this new world, to build these United States of America, to build basically every single thing in the United States, because who was doing it? It was the enslaved. They had no choice, and they did it for centuries, right? And yet, despite all of that turmoil, despite massive loss of life, still we are here, still overcomers in a system that really was never designed for us to be free. So then that was so deep and heavy. We move on, and I was like, okay, what's next? They were like, okay, you're back at the front of the museum. Do you guys want to do the boat ride? And we wanted to do the boat ride, but when we first entered the museum, they were like, it's raining, and so we shut it down. And so they have buses that run every 15 minutes, shuttle buses, nice little shuttle buses. And so we just hopped on the bus. We waited for our peers to join us, and there were a diverse group of peers. It was diverse, very diverse people. Everybody's visiting this. And so they took us to basically like the railroad tracks. I was like, okay, what is this? And so this site of the railroad tracks, from my understanding, this is also where the enslaved were moved across from state to state in the domestic slave trade. So Bryan Stevenson was very intentional. Every single thing that he did, every single location of this monument, these massive 3 monuments, they're so big and huge, you guys. Very intentional to acknowledge the transgressions that occurred in Montgomery, Alabama. So we walked down, we finally get to where we're going. We had to wait like 5 minutes. And so there were a group of us, and they were like, okay, you guys walk through this little security, we're gonna check you again. And this is going to take you to the Alabama River. It's a 6-minute walk to get down this ramp. We get on a boat, a small river boat. There are 2 conductors, and we were like, do we need seatbelts or anything? And they were like, no. So we all sat down on this river boat, and it was so pretty and beautiful, but it was very hot out there. So make sure you bring water if you go. And so the conductor is telling us essentially, just sit back and relax. So we get on and they start moving, and then the radio, the announcement starts to play and tells us that you are now here in the Alabama River, the site where the domestic slave trade in Alabama took place for many years. Hundreds of thousands of slaves came through Montgomery, Alabama, and they were transported using a steamboat.
For financial backing. The major routes that steamboats used to traffic enslaved people were down the Mississippi, with tens of thousands of them in the first half of the year.
You see, the history of slavery is still very much present in Montgomery, Alabama. So steamboats were used to transport the enslaved to different areas of the South, to different areas of the country. They were just telling us as we rode, so many, enslaved have passed through these waters, and it's very solemn, it's very sad. And so then the boat we ride for a little bit, and then the boat sort of came to a stop, and it's like all of this wooded area. You start to see like a lot of woods, and it's a very eerie feeling, because I was like, is this what our ancestors felt? Yes, this is exactly what they felt. And I'm gonna tell y'all, it was hot as heck out there. It was so hot. So I just can't imagine, what their experience was, because everywhere was super hot. So we depart the boat, tell the individuals thank you for bringing us there. And so you walk back up, and then this leads you to the sculpture part. Now this is a part that is very much sacred, and it has so many different sculptures. Slave houses there, so we could go in to see where the enslaved had to sleep, how they slept. We could see the slave quarters. And you cannot take pictures in this area. And there was one lady who was very disrespectful. She was with her child and another partner, and she just would not stop, doing selfies. And I was like, they've already told you, and if you aren't just paying attention to the significance of this, why are you even out here? But they had teenage interns, which I thought was very nice to see, like those kids out there actually working and learning and helping. So you do this immersive experience at the sculpture park, and you can see like the exhibits that they built. It tells you how most of the enslaved came from West Africa, which was like good. So we can pinpoint. We knew this, but it's good to see it like on the wall. Like 45% came from West Africa. Now, where in West Africa, you have to do your DNA to determine that. And so you just go around and you can see different exhibits. They were all beautiful. And I forgot to mention, at the Legacy Museum, so much black art was in there. I'm just telling you, black art, African art. And if you've never seen a Kehinde Wiley portrait or a Kehinde Wiley sculpture, my middle name is Kehinde, you gotta go, because that's like a rarity to see that so many people donated their art and sculptures to this museum. And so this is like an amazing exhibit, like something you would probably have to pay a lot of money for if you were in New York. Okay, I'm just telling you, y'all gotta go. Kehinde Wiley, do you know who Kehinde Wiley is? Okay, and so back to the sculpture part. So at the sculpture part, it's just like a big circle, but there's so much land out there that you're walking around, and you can just see all these sculptures of African faces. You can see, unfortunately, some of the tools that were used, like a hot box. You can see how individuals were hung upside down. It's just very sad to see, you all, to know that people actually went through all of this. That this was all like human trafficking. It was just so illegal. And so then you kind of circle back, and as you're leaving out, another thing Brian Stevens and Stevenson and his crew did so well, there's this big wall, y'all. If you've ever been or seen like monuments in Washington, D.C., where there's like freedom walls or walls to those lives who were lost, there's this massive wall. And it's like I can't think of this, a wall of remembrance, but I can't think of the exact name, but it's all gold. And basically they give you a QR code. And if you scan this code, you can see your family's name. And I saw Osborne, I saw Wilson, which is my paternal grandmother's last name. I saw McCool, and I saw Collins, and Tim saw Edwards, and he saw Woods. And so that lets you know that your family was connected to transatlantic slave trade, because many of our last names are not, they're the names of the slave holders, right? So just confirm, like, you're so important to the history and the framing of these United States of America. So it was just a profound experience. We're so, y'all, just outdone with that whole experience that, we didn't even get to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which highlights the tragic and heinous legacy of lynching in these United States of America. And so if you can't get to something on one day, you can go back the next day and still use your tickets to get into the exhibit. But it was just a profound, life-changing experience for me. And that night, y'all, I think I was a little bit traumatized because I could not go to sleep because the holograms were so real to me. And I wanted to be like, man, I'm trying to get you out of here, ma'am. I don't know what to do. The holograms were just terrible to me. And then seeing those faces on the floor, those heads, the people, it was just such an immersive experience, y'all. I have not captured everything. The profound art everywhere. So they have a wall that's filled with dirt, mason jars filled with dirt to remember those individuals who lost their lives to lynching. And there was just so much more. And then there's movie theaters, and you can see like who created the art or who created this. And everything was just historical and educational. And it was such a profound experience. And also there's a soul food restaurant there that, really celebrates the rich legacy of soul food and how, customs and recipes were passed down. It's comfort food, and it's a food that was created in love. I grew up eating soul food. And so it was just such a profound experience. We're going to go back. If you have children who are teenagers, if you are wanting to learn anything about who you are as a Black person living in these United States of America, please get on down to Montgomery, Alabama, and visit the Legacy Museum because you will learn so much about yourself. I left there deeply traumatized, but also inspired and hopeful because I know that there is work yet to be done, that it is my purpose in life to learn about who I am and to educate other people about the important contributions of Black folks in America, and to always be vocal and to speak up for the disenfranchised, regardless of, whoever they are. And another thing I want to say, if you are not a person of African descent or a Black person, you still should go to educate yourself, to learn how to be a better ally, to learn how to be a support system to those who are dealing with some of these harsh and punitive policies and some of the things that we face as members of the disenfranchised in these United States of America. It is well done. It should make you feel uncomfortable because slavery, nothing was happy, nothing was celebratory about it, nothing was exciting, and no one liked to be enslaved, and it has had a very much deleterious impact on generations and generations of Black people since its inception. And so we need to be very clear about that. There were no happy slaves. And also what I learned is that people didn't just sit by and just, accept slavery casually. Revolted in ways that they could. But when you are so disenfranchised and so shackled and so downtrodden, there's only so much you really can do. But I was just inspired, and I just had an amazing time. Boy, did I learn something in Montgomery, Alabama. We also went to Alabama State University, had fun just hanging out at the bookstore for a little bit, and then we got back on the road. But before I leave, I want to show you some of the books that are very cheap that I think if you want to learn a little bit more about the history of the domestic slave trade in Montgomery, Alabama, you should purchase. I pretty much bought all the books that they had there. And I got this nice bag here. Of course, I'm a Delta, so I like red. And it reads, "You don't change the world with ideas in your mind, but with the conviction in your heart." Brian Stevenson. And if you don't know Brian Stevenson, he wrote that book, Just Mercy, based on his experience trying to help an individual, escape mass incarceration. So these are some of the books that I bought from the bookstore, which is very nice as well. And Tim got a hat. He's been wearing it every day. I said, baby, you walking around here looking like KRS-One. Fight the power that be. So this book is, and I've read this, okay? As you can see, I have highlighted all through this book. It is so good. And it talks about the domestic slave trade in these United States. And it's by the Equal Justice Initiative, which we did visit as well, because I was like, Tim, we got to go see the site of the Montgomery slave, trade, the water. We need to go see that. Also the site of the Montgomery Brawl. And also we just need to go see if Brian Stevenson is in the office, because I need to tell him thank you. And I did go to his office. But this is Slavery in America, Montgomery slave trade. It is so good. And it's profound, okay? There's no excuse for us to not know, y'all. This is a whole museum dedicated to helping you understand who you are as a Black person in America. This other book is Race and Jury, Legal Discrimination in Jury Selection. And so I was like, you know what? I need to do better and get on my jury duty. Okay, I need to do better with my jury duty. My mom was a poll worker. She was very serious about it. You know, I come from kind of semi-political family, and so we've always talked about politics and who we are as people. We're very proud people. This book is Lynching in America: Confronting the Legacy of Racial Terror, 3rd edition. It's heavy. Lynching is heavy. I'm from Mississippi. There's a lot of stuff that has taken place down there. This book is Segregation in America. And again, everyone should read these because it's the truth about what has occurred in these United States of America. We have to reconcile this tragic past in order for us to unify as a nation. You know, I love being an American, but I do not agree with and I do not like the things that have happened to my people in this country. Construction in America. All right, I'm from the South, so I like learning about Reconstruction. Racial violence after the Civil War, 1865 through 1876. And also, once you get these books and go down there, you definitely need to start celebrating Juneteenth. If you don't celebrate, it's going to make you want to celebrate Juneteenth even more. And finally, this book is The Transatlantic Slave Trade. Remember I was talking about those heads and faces? This stuff right here, when you see this, you're going to just fall out and cry. Well, that's my video, and Tim and I made a video as well. I'll probably share that, but if I can compile all of my videos and show y'all, I will. But if I can't, just accept this. But please take your children, your grandchildren, anyone who's taking for granted the hard work and the struggle, the blood that was literally shed by millions of people for you to be here. You know, someone who don't want to go to college and they're just like, whatever, why do I need to go to college? Because guess what? You were supposed to be chattel, and someone had to die. Someone literally was killed, okay? Or someone lost their life during the transatlantic slave trade so that you can learn how to read, so that you can vote in these elections, and yet you refuse to. That's why you need to know your history. That's why learning your history is so important. And it's like that maxim says, if you don't know where you have been, you will not know where you are going. So I hope that you know where you are going. Take care, you guys.